You're listening to Technomics, connecting you to insights on digital transformation and the marketplace, with your hosts Robin Ituli and Jeremy Nelson. The hosts' opinions are their own. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Technomics. We are in episode 5 of the workforce enablement season, and today's topic is about the gig-based economy and the inevitable shift in your infrastructure. In other words, what kind of scaffolding are you going to need for the people who are probably not going to be around for long?
I like the scaffolding. You think of think of people who aren't there for long. People come out working on your house, working on a building, build up scaffolding, they get it supported. When the gig's over, scaffolding comes down and goes away.
Yeah, project-based too, right? A while ago, I saw a very interesting Intel video, and I think it was produced by somebody in their EMEA team, but they were talking about how learning and development is going to change because people are no longer going to select jobs. They're going to choose projects where they can apply their expertise or learn and grow their expertise. And, that kind of fundamental shift in how we work is going to have a lot of demands on the IT folks who are making all those things stand up and stay up.
Absolutely. And we even see it to a certain degree from the services perspective here at Insight is that, we have very, very busy seasons, but we don't necessarily need to be able to maintain an entire services staff to maintain us through that busy season. So we have plenty of folks who just kind of take ad hoc projects that we contract with to help us through individual needs. And then they go off and they work on something else, and it's a win-win.
It's the same, too, on the marketing side. We have a tremendous bench of journalists, really, who write for us on a routine basis for a variety of projects, and they develop various beats. And, we have our favorites that we get to work with a lot because, the projects always seem to be there for them. And I think that's a interesting hallmark for the way of things to come.
Absolutely. And it even goes back. It's obviously at an inflection point at this time where if you go back to the 90s, even in the early .com days, as things were really ramping up, that was a big issue back then was this contract labor. And there were actually lawsuits around because at the time, one of the primary incentives was around options and things like that. And you had companies like Microsoft who were getting sued by very large staffs of contract laborers who were left out of some of those optionings. And so, it's obviously been a theme, especially in IT, that's been around for a period of time now. But obviously, as it's matured and we've grown into this consumption-based model, I think it's gone even further in that direction.
Well, we're going to take a deeper dive on this. And when we come back, we will have our guest today, Curt Cornum, who is the Vice President and Chief Architect here at Insight. He has so many wonderful opinions, and I can't wait to bring him into this conversation.
I absolutely love it. Anytime I can get 5 minutes to talk to Curt, it's always exciting.
A side note, in addition to being a ridiculously intelligent man, he also has adorable schnauzers that I think he's going to bring your dog to work day.
Fantastic. And I believe he even made it onto our own Insight Instagram feed.
Oh, absolutely.
Your Dynamics CRM system is vital to your sales process, and more importantly, your business growth. However, think of how important customer insights are to your marketing teams, customer service teams, public relations, social media interactions, and the list goes on. Let Blue Metal take your Dynamics CRM to the next level with full lifecycle customer relationship management, enabling you to attract and retain customers, define and improve sales processes, offer consistent interaction across all sales and services channels, a full 360-degree view of your customer with ubiquitous access, including mobile platforms. And Blue Metal's Connected Field Services allows for proactive service delivery and real-time insights as to how and when your customers are using your products, resulting in improved service level performance and with the ability to leverage Internet of Things-based telemetry, metrics, and predictive analytics to have a real-time view of how and when your customers are using your product and proactively schedule service, raising quality and reducing costs to you and your customer. To learn more, visit insight.com/bluemetalcrm. That's insight.com/bluemetalcrm.
Have you ever had a moonlighting gig, Jeremy?
I have, actually.
What was it?
Pulling network cables for an event company. It was awful. It was awful.
Nice. I taught group fitness for about 8 years. Most fun job I've ever had.
Mine was a couple of weekends. 8 years?
Yeah.
That's a huge commitment.
So much fun.
That's like 2 jobs. That's not moonlighting at that point.
No, it's only 1 hour at a time. There are OSHA regulations around that. Well, gigs, though, are really reshaping what we're doing in terms of the workforce, and there's entire economies. I mean, you look at Uber and the conversations that have been had about whether or not these people are employees or contractors, and, that's a lot of gray area that's developing here, and businesses are really sorting out what they should be doing. So to help answer some of those questions, we have one Mr. Curt Cornum, Vice President and Chief Architect at Insight, and also resident futurist. Unofficially. Officially. So Curt's here today to talk about the gig-based economy with us, because it's really making a splash.
It is.
Have you ever had a gig? A side gig?
I don't believe I have.
Wow.
Man.
So unmillennial of you.
Yeah, thanks for noticing.
Okay, so why do you think the gig economy has grown so much and gained in popularity? Let's call it in the last 5 years.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. A lot of folks look to the millennials, and they point to the millennials as being a part of that. But I think some of it has just been purely driven by the realities of the economics that are out there. And honestly, some people like that situation, right? So I think it's less of a generational thing, and I think it could be more of an age thing. In other words, if you look at folks when they're younger, they have less commitments, so it's easier to have some uncertainty in your paycheck, so to speak. And then you have a lot of folks that are actually retiring early but still have a lot to offer to the economy, and they have a lot of knowledge, and so they want to go out and do things on a consulting basis, on a gig basis. And so I think you have folks at the young end of the scale and folks at the older end of the scale that are both participating in the so-called gig or freelance economy.
That's interesting. Yeah, actually, my dad probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that, built his own LLC. He's a physician assistant and went and practiced in some rural areas because there are entire businesses that actually support that, which you're seeing a lot more of. There are actually infrastructures to help supply those kind of contractors. Healthcare is just one mechanism. I mentioned Uber as being another, and you see a lot of recruiting firms who are really adopting this mentality too. But just finding the people is one area where the infrastructure is spinning up, right? It's kind of a social platform. But what are the other mechanisms that have to be in place within a business to really support an employee base who's more of a contractor?
There's a lot of folks that do that today. If you look at financial advisors, a lot of them have independent agents today. If you look at the insurance companies, a lot of them do that as well today. So there's a lot of folks that have been in that model for quite some time. So dealing with contractors really isn't new to them. I think a big part of the difference really is if maybe not look at the millennial employee as much as the clients the customers that they're interacting with. There's been so much change in that area that I think it's also making real changes to how the workforce needs to adapt to that. And I think if you look at, there's somebody much smarter than me said, one of the strategies is look at what isn't going to change in the next 10 years. So when you look at retail and products, or look at the retail space in the next 10 years, there's probably 3 things that aren't going to change. People still want low prices, they still want availability, and they want selection. So those things really aren't going to change. So if you're going to build your business strategy, you look at the things that aren't going to change, and I think those 3 things are going to be stable over the next 10 years. Now, I think when you look at what has changed in the recent past has been that the customers are much more tech savvy than they've ever been, and they're much more socially conscious than they've ever been. And both of those 2 things are really upsetting the way that we interact with customers, the way that we provide customer service to people today.
That's an interesting one, the socially conscious, right? You see that kind of as a double-edged sword because you have these organizations, like you said, with the advent of social media, where they come out and they position themselves and they, for best intentions, try and support social action and things like that. And we've seen those kind of backlash on people. So that's an interesting one to kind of bring up as an implication of kind of modern day retail.
Right. And the example I use is how many folks like yourself how many times have you balked at paying $1.99 for an app? While you're drinking a $3 cup of coffee, right? And people do that, and you're like, what's the behavior? What's driving that change in behavior that folks would actually balk at paying $1.99 for something? And it's an interesting thing, and I think the reason is there's been an expectation that's been set that a lot more is free today. Right, there's the freemium economy that we hear about. So there's a lot of services that people get today that are free. There's a lot more information out there, and that drives that change in behavior of what folks are valuing and what they're willing to pay for these days. And it's really upsetting a lot of retailers, and it's changing expectations within the customer base as well.
I think it's such an interesting point because when I was actually thinking about this morning, I can answer balking at the $1.99 thing. Because here's the deal. You don't really get to demo a lot of those lower threshold apps, right? So I get in there, I'm looking around, I've spent the $1.99, and I'm like,
buyer's remorse on $2.
Kind of sucks.
That's pretty hardcore.
That's kind of my point. But to your point, Jeremy, earlier is you can actually get product reviews on a product that cost $1.99. That's the other phenomenon.
So here's the flip side of that, though. And this is where I think that there's a lot of value. And this is where I think there's even more change, which is it's software as a service, right? So one of the apps that I am crazy obsessed with right now is for the Skim, which is a phenomenal newsletter. I'm just going to go ahead and plug them. If you're not subscribed to the Skim, you should totally do it. It'll make you a great conversationalist. But they also have a calendar. And the calendar plugs into your own calendar. So it has things in there like Amazon Prime Day is tomorrow. And today is
got enough emails about that one. I don't think I was going to miss Amazon Prime Day.
Don't worry. We're well aware. Your email direct mail system is on overload right now. But it also tells you things like, hey, Wimbledon is coming up, or it's Bastille Day. I'm now just making things up, but I'm pretty sure that's in July. However, but that as a service, and there's a monthly charge for that ability to keep me posted on what's going on, I find real value in that. And I think that you see a lot of companies, organizations really moving towards that model where it's not just that one-time download, it's that ongoing presentation of value.
I just, to your point, I think your expectations are higher, right? Your expectations are pretty high of even something that you're paying less than $2 for, and you wouldn't really have that kind of expectation with something like you're going to buy a Big Gulp or something like that. You really don't have that kind of expectation. You're surely not going to fill out a review for a Big Gulp, but yet you go online and for an app, and
that's
you're
what
like,
Yelp
well,
is for.
You're like, well, I don't know, it doesn't have 4 stars. I don't think I'm going to commit to it. So it's an interesting psychology that's happening in that space. And I think the other part of that is I just believe people's loyalties are much fragiler than they've ever been. In other words, they may be fiercely loyal, but if something changes in the way that they engage with a company, they will flip their loyalty to a new company and then be fiercely loyal over there. And I think it's really upsetting to folks in the retail space as well. Because of that, it's kind of the double-edged sword where they need to be on social media because they need to have a presence out there. But if there's an issue with something that happens in their business, people can pile on, and it can really change the way people perceive that business, even if they've never actually engaged with that business. They read something negative about it, and they're like, okay, I think I'll move on. And so the loyalties that we see out there today are really changing as well, and I think it's having a big impact.
So we've talked about that in terms of retailers and customer engagement. With the gig-based economy, how do you think that that's going to impact things? Because now you're talking about not just your customer base, but your potential workforce being able to make those moves very quickly. And what kind of challenges does that pose for IT?
Well, there's quite a few, because the part of it is, where do folks work today? Where do they want to work? How do they want to, engage in a workplace, so to speak? And some of that's changing quite a bit. The freelancers, to your point, the gig economy is changing that quite a bit. But I think in some ways it's mirroring the way that we all want to engage with our employer today. So I think when you see any employee today, they're acting in some ways much more like a freelancer in terms of their expectations. So that's my view of it. When I walk into the building here, I have a certain expectation that I'm going to be able to use a personal device that I have. In some cases, that's actually a policy where we have personally owned phones now that we use to have corporate information on them. I want to use certain apps that are my preference so that I can get my work done. That really isn't that much different from a freelancer who kind of has those types of freedoms today, or those liberties to do that today. And we actually see customers that have a combination of, let's say they have a franchise model and they have a corporate owned model, whether it's in like financial services is a good example of that. In that financial services model, you could look at that building as being a building full of freelancers, right? They're not on the payroll of the parent company, and the parent company actually doesn't provide any of the hardware infrastructure down at that brick and mortar building, but they do provide the applications to them. So when you look at that environment, I've actually worked with a customer that wants to take that model of the franchise, kind of the freelance building, if you want to call it that, think about it that way, and they want to move that over to their corporate owned sites, because as it turns out, the freelance one is a heck of a lot less work for them in terms of maintenance. They don't have to buy the hardware, they don't have to buy any of that infrastructure. They just need to make sure they can push their applications down to those folks and that they can get connected in a secure way. So obviously security is a big part of this. We haven't really touched on it yet.
I believe it was one Liz Lemon who once said, "I'm a contract writer. It's like a modern day cowboy."
Curt, this is amazing conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll continue when we come back with more Technomics.
The world of design is changing, and these are very exciting times. The way things are designed and made is truly radically transforming through technology. So whether you're making bridges or buildings, products or media, Autodesk has a solution that can help you prepare your business for a new era. Autodesk recently introduced Industry Collections, the most convenient and flexible way to access a wide selection of some of the most essential Autodesk software that many businesses are using. And all of this comes in a single collection that will evolve and get better over time, and they are customized into 3 collections, one for architecture, engineering, and construction, another for media and entertainment, and a third for product design. The new solution, Industry Collections, provides value that well exceeds the premium suites at a pretty competitive price point. The simplicity of the offering and the customization helps make the decision and purchase process much, much easier. Additionally, subscribing to AutoCAD gets you the latest software releases, access to cloud storage, technical support, and more. AutoCAD 360 Pro is now included when you subscribe, letting you view, edit, and share drawings easily on your mobile device. If you want to learn more, reach out to an Autodesk rep by zipping an email to autodeskna@insight.com.
You know, what's interesting is that we started off the conversation talking about freelance employment, right? And kind of gig-based economy. And we've kind of brought up a number of different things, and it really all kind of has a very common vein of just consumption, right? We've talked about freemium apps where, you kind of come in and you buy as you need from that application. We've talked about cloud, which is all about consumption models. We've talked about freelance employment, where it's consumption-based employment to a certain degree. So it all kind of has this same kind of vein to it of, I'm only going to consume what I need when I need, whether that's my employer, whether that's infrastructure from a cloud perspective, whether that's if I want to go and buy some coins in an app to make sure that I can unlock Pokeballs on Pokemon Go. Not that I know anything about that, but it just kind of has
I heard
that
experience there.
maybe just a little bit. I am a grown man. I shouldn't be doing that, but it doesn't matter. But
as long as you don't have a binder full of like the old coins, then we're okay.
No. It's all good. It's all digital. Wait, hold on. But anyway, it all kind of ties back to that same, just very consumption based, right? Where it is more on an individual level.
Yeah, there was I actually used the term the subscription economy, and I think that's what you're referring to, Jeremy. And it's kind of interesting because it started out, some of it's not new. I mean, we use Netflix, we use other things today. That kind of moved from that consumer-based subscription economy that we were pretty used to the software as a service that we started to see in the cloud space. And then that moved to infrastructure as a service, where now it wasn't just the software, but it was some compute and storage that was in the cloud. And I did a pay-as-you-go type of model. But what we're seeing now that is really powerful and the most disruptive is going to be what we call, and I'm not the only one that's calling it, it's a pretty well a described term these days, is technology as a service. And the difference around what technology as a service, and you look at infrastructure as a service or software as a service, is you could have on-premise components. With the first two, everything is quote-unquote in the cloud. When you look at these technology as a service solutions, there is a component of them or components of them that are actually on-premise, and then there's some components that are in the cloud. And what typically happens is they get the minimal footprint that they can have at the remote location on-premise, and they move as much of the management and the maintenance and the control to the cloud because it's easier for them to do that. And then they provide it as a OpEx model. So it allows people to move from a capital expenditure model to an operational expenditure model, which a lot of companies like because there's some tax implications there, and they can pay as you go, pay as you grow type of thing, and they don't have to invest ahead of demand. So it's a pretty powerful transition that we're seeing in the market today, is moving to these technology as a service models. And part of it is the clients, our clients, want us to share in the risk. And we do that by providing that as a service. And if they wanted out of it, they could get out of it. And guess what? We need to take that on-premise hardware back, and somebody has to account for that.
That's such a great point. And that's something we've done for a long time, actually. Like if you think about our distribution center and the kinds of inventory that we keep on hand in order to be able to store and then distribute to some of our clients who buy, a certain IT standard that goes to their workforce. That's one thing. But I'm hearing a lot of buzz about that in the service provider industry, kind of having that device as a service model built out in addition to their software and infrastructure solutions that they're providing. And because it's, as you say, they want to be able to cater to their clients with an end-to-end technology model that can be OpEx.
Right, and we call it the branch of the future. And if you looked at what I call the foundational technology that's in a future branch or even in some current branches, you've got, of course, the wired and wireless network. Everybody needs to get connected somehow. You've got the endpoints that you just mentioned. They could be laptops, they could be desktops. Those could be other mobile devices. You've got some kind of wide area network to get them connected back to corporate headquarters and out to the internet to get to all these SaaS offerings that we mentioned. You have some kind of voice and voicemail and that whole call control system. You have the compute and storage that we mentioned, and then you have the kind of security controls that wrap around all of that. And if you look at those 5 foundational technologies, I could go out today if I was starting a small business and I could get all of those as a service today. I could literally get each one of those technologies in an OpEx model and do as a pay-as-you-go. So it reduces my risk up front. It makes me a heck of a lot more nimble in terms of getting faster to market. I reduce my ongoing support because a lot of these solutions are handled by the solution providers. And then when I do need to react to changing technology, I'm not locked into some type of depreciation schedule of 3 and 5 years that I can't get out of and lets my competitors leapfrog me. So this is very powerful to be able to provide that entire technology footprint as a service today. And it's something that wasn't available, honestly, a few years ago, but today we could go build that for a client.
And let's talk about that depreciation schedule for a moment and the increasingly rapid evolution of technology. I think this has a particular implication with the gig-based economy because think about who you'd want to work for. One thing that really appeals to the millennial set is being able to either A, have the choice in their device, and B, have the kind of experience that they would want to secure. So if you're an employer who's on a 3 to 5 year depreciation schedule with something that will be proclaimed a brick within the next 6 months, right? That is an employment and recruiting risk for you. So being able to have that turnover of devices and having some way to not get leapfrogged or to leapfrog the current trend, right? To get out in front of it and be the next best thing so you can secure the next best talent and you can, grow in that trajectory means a lot in terms of business strategy.
Absolutely. I heard of a company that when they got the interns in, they were giving the interns hand-me-down laptops. And they realized they weren't getting a lot of the interns that wanted to come to work for them full time. And that seemed like the logical thing to do. Why am I going to give them the latest, greatest? And they actually changed that strategy because it was those interns that really, had a much different expectation than folks that had been working there for several years. Folks that had been there knew the policy that was embedded within the culture. The folks that were coming in as interns, they had expectations that weren't driven by the current culture, and so they changed that policy to be able, to your point, to reduce some of the risk.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I have actually made employment decisions based off of the technology package that was given to me.
This does not surprise me.
Oh, well, all right then.
Said the man sitting there with the really cool book that he's testing out for IT. You're always on the cutting edge.
I am. Almost bleeding edge.
Oh, bleeding edge.
One other point that we haven't really talked about that I think is important is because we did talk about kind of the expectations up front and what's driving value. We talked about this consumption-based model, but really that engagement piece, whether it's the gig economy or just the current consumer, it's really more of a mobile consumer that's driving a lot of this today. And it really is changing the way people engage, whether the workers that are freelancing or not. There's an expectation that I want to engage with a company on my terms, and sometimes it's going to be self-service. Sometimes it's going to be high touch, but it always needs to be on my terms. And I think that is really having a huge impact on what we're seeing across our customer base as well. And there's some great examples of that. For example, how many times have you actually talked to an Amazon employee? Have you ever actually talked to an Amazon employee?
Once. I did a return.
No,
but this is a long time Amazon. This is a while back.
I never have. I talked to an Amazon employee because I have a lot of friends in Seattle, but that has nothing to do with purchases or returns.
It's interesting though, but we're having this conversation, but one of the big selling points, I don't know if you remember, with the second generation Fire devices was that you could pull somebody up and video chat with Amazon support. But it's interesting that here in this forum that none of us have ever even spoken to an Amazon.
No, because now they're just using that kind of engagement to feed into some sort of big data source where it's just voice activated.
That was kind of my point, which is, what it means to have a high touch experience is changing, right? And that could be, that's because of they have the right infrastructure in place, they have the right analytics, the information when they need it, they have the applications in the hands of the workforce, whether they're, millennials, contractor, freelancers, the gig economy, whatever you want to call it. It really doesn't change the fact that you need those three things. You've got to have the infrastructure to support it. You got to have the analytics that are helping make real-time decisions in real-time business. And then, of course, you need the applications to be able to present that so whoever the workforce is can engage the client the way that they want to be engaged. It's an important part of it.
That's really, really interesting. This is good stuff. But let's boil it down for our listeners. Make it really simple for us. In one line, can you tell me, what does a business need to think about for their infrastructure in introducing the gig economy?
Well, I think what I just mentioned was that foundational technology. If you don't have the underlying infrastructure, the analytics so that you can react in real time and understand the relationship you have with your customer, and then provide the applications to your end workers that are able to engage them the way that the customers want to be engaged.
Awesome. Way to sum it up. All right, Curt, we're so thankful that you spent some time with us today to talk about the gig economy and the infrastructure you need to support it.
It's my pleasure.
Well, speaking of high touch and engaging, this conversation has been extremely engaging and can't wait to continue with the duration of our season and to welcome Curt Cornum back to the conversation inevitably on any topic.
High rotation. We need to make sure that Mr. Cornum is in high rotation, I would say. Thanks for listening to Technomics. If you want to find more episodes, you can download the podcast from iTunes, Google, or your favorite podcast provider. And for more stories on intelligent technology, visit insight.com.